What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of The Real Ones. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Mr. Palm Jumeirah, Yasin Valimulla. Welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Joel. Pleasure.
It's been a long time in the making. We've been speaking for a few months now.
Yeah, I think it's been 6 months when we initially met, and we've kind of gone back and forth, and
exactly
we reconnected a few weeks ago, and then...
Absolutely. And by the time this episode comes out, Yasin's going to become a customer. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
No, but it's, I really like the fact that we were able to come in very early on and say, hey, we don't really have much, but we want to learn. And then 6 months later, you can kind of see what it's turned into now.
Yeah, I mean, the growth from when you initially kind of showed or pitched it to me to what it is now is incredible.
Yeah, I'm surprised you even entertained me, to be honest, at the time. But I'm grateful and honestly, really loved learning about your story because it's a little bit different, I would say, than, yes, you've got the estate agency background, you've got the Knight Franks, the Keller Williams, you got the whole spiel, right? That's all there. And that's amazing. But I think you've also got this Batman life that you had earlier on. I think you share a little bit more about that in a bit. Yeah. But before all of that, I would like to ask you just what did you want to do when you were 7 years old?
Oh, wow. Interesting question. I've not been asked that for a long time. So, from a young age, I was very sporty, very competitive. So, that's, I think, a trait I had from a very, very young age. I think initially I always wanted to be a football player. Okay. So it was one of two things. Either I wanted to be a football player or an athlete because I was a 100-meter sprinter. Yeah. So I was always very, very sporty. It's something I really resonated with. And I honestly thought that would be my career, sports. Wow. But yeah, it didn't quite turn out that way.
I think you can probably start now. you got the muscles, we see them. No. But is it something that you regret not pursuing, perhaps, or?
Well, no. I was brought up in quite a strict, conservative Indian Muslim family. Okay. Obviously, my parents were immigrants. Yeah. The concept of their son being a sports person just didn't really ring true to them. And not only that, they want the best for me. And, their point was, well, you don't get any Indian British football players, and neither do you get them in athletics. Wow. So, they were a bit more old school. Their mindset was very different to mine. And I think that was their justification. Well, no one else has done it, so why would you do it? Whereas I'm the opposite, because if someone hasn't done it, then I want to be the one who breaks that barrier and breaks that glass ceiling, right? Yeah. But that's probably one of the reasons I didn't pursue it, because, it gets to a stage, especially in the UK, when you excel at a certain level in sports, you need to then be doing a lot of training. You've got to do after school clubs, and there's a lot involved with that, because you get to a level where your natural ability will get you so far, but then you need training, you need a coach, you need a mentor, and for that you need to be doing extra things, and that my parents didn't really think it was something that they'd wanted to pursue, and I kind of just went with it at the time. And I think because of that, I probably rebelled later on, and then ended up just becoming a bit of a black sheep in the family after that.
Oh,
yeah. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way.
I'm sure your parents are proud now. Look at what you've done, what you've built, and also there's a few brokerage owners with offices on the Palm and things like that. It's very cool, and also just the sort of reputation you've built for yourself in the business, right? Whenever someone's thinking about the Palm, they're thinking about you, and that's obviously a very important part. But what's also important, and I've seen you really place a lot of emphasis on this, is just social media. You had the domain reserved before anybody else, to be honest. I don't think a lot of the people today are trying to coin Mr. Damak Hills or Mr. Danube or Mr. Shobha Realty or whatever it is. Yeah. But you had this way early on. Why did you even do that?
I think I was, again, not just trying to blow my own trumpet here, but I was probably slightly ahead of the curve in terms of, I realized from a very early, before I came to Dubai, I already did real estate, right? And I was self-employed, my own company. Yeah. So I already had that more entrepreneurial mindset. When I came to Dubai, obviously it's commission-only industry. I was working for a number of different brokerages at the time. And I realized, especially when you looked at the American model, that you are actually your own brand. So it doesn't matter if you're working for the bigger brands or a smaller brand. Ultimately, the relationship was with the individual. And I'm not saying being with a big brand doesn't have advantage. Of course it does, because it gives you that grounding and it gives you that foundation. But that's not the be and end all, in my opinion. So I think early kind of 2014, 2015, when Instagram was coming out, I didn't quite get Instagram in the beginning. I've never been a big Facebook user as well. And I thought, well, why don't I try and leverage this for real estate? Which is why I called it Mr. Palm Jumeirah, because it wasn't even though there's a personal aspect to it, because I've humanized the account, because I realized if it's just about property, no one cares, because everyone does that anyway. I just thought, okay, this should be interesting. I've always been known about the Palm. My website was called Mr. Palm Jumeirah at the time, which I bought years ago, and my whole website was done by me anyway. It still has been. It's been probably 10 years. I've adapted it since then. And then I just thought, okay, why not? Got a YouTube with a similar name as well. And it was quite interesting, because it was early days. Not many people were doing it, or if at all any were doing it at that time, 2015, 2016, I think it was. And it just kind of just grew. I got a lot of followers. I was getting a lot of clients, a lot of leads out of it. And it was always, the element of doing that was to get clients from it, right? Of course, showcase some of my properties, showcase a bit of my private life. Although as time's gone on, I showcase less of my private life than I used to, let's say maybe 6-7 years ago. But it's worked really well for me, and I think that name has stuck. 100%. It was a bit cheesy at the time, and even I was like, I'm not sure about this name. It's cheesy. But guess what? People see me on the Palm, on the streets, in the mall, and they know me purely from, you're Mr. Palm Jumeirah, right? Like I don't even have a name.
It's like saying you're Superman, is this
not quite Superman, but that name has stuck, because at one stage I was like, should I change it? It sounds really cheesy, and I thought, why would I change it? That would be such crazy. And then 3-4 years ago, I would say, then a lot of the brokers started understanding the leveraging. Social media companies had more emphasis on it. Agents realized that they have to be their own brand. And then everyone then started becoming Mr. This and Mr. That. And now obviously it's turned a full 360 right now. Everyone's on it. And if you're a real estate advisor now, if you're not on social media, then you're running up a very, very steep hill, because the reality of it is the game has changed. I did real estate. I started in 2005.
Tell us about
when everything was on Excel and spreadsheets. There was no CRMs. Everything was written down. We were door knocking in the UK. It was really old school. And then you look at how it's advanced, how it's adapted now as well. It's much, much easier now, in the sense everything's, even these CRMs that you get, they're all kind of AI integrated now as well. The portals that you have. In one way, it's become much easier because of the tools that are available to you. But that comes with a caveat, right? Because then you get much lazier agents. So I come from the old school element where we did everything. And I think when you then start your own business, that really helps, because you realize you've got to do everything anyway when you initially start your own company. And I think sometimes agents underestimate how much it takes. Number one, running a business it's totally different. You being an agent who makes a lot of money and think, well, okay, I might as well set up my own agency. I always say, well, set up your own agency. Then let me know in 6 to 12 months how that went. Because trust me, it's not as easy as you think. And Dubai is not that easy. Like, let's say in setting up an agency, with the amount of money that's involved, and advertising, marketing, branding, agents, recruitment, offices, and all kinds of licenses. There's a lot of money element involved with it. I'm just happy that I started that journey quite early on in terms of the self-branding. It's great everyone's doing it, but I think you just have to be mindful and conscious of how you're doing it as well. In my opinion, there's a lot of people that are just copy, cut and paste. No originality. They look at what other agents are doing and they literally just copy it. And I find that quite...
But it's interesting. I had this same conversation with Alessia,
of course.
Another fellow Palm member, right? And she was saying, sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's say you've created an original piece of content that's going viral. Someone else does the same thing. I actually think it might be smarter for that person who's trying to grow, right? Not trying to be original or Einstein or anything like that. They just want to, jump in on the growth. They just copy the exact same format, do something slightly different, and then put the same thing out effectively.
No, right? And I definitely agree with you there, because you can't, how much originality can you get? But I just think there's just too much, sometimes even the wording exactly the same, right? I think it's just have some element where you're showing your personality as well. It can't just be, well, he did it or she did it, and maybe I should just copy them because it worked for them. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you.
No.
And I get it. It's a very tight space. Dubai's got thousands of agents.
Yeah.
Everyone's competing for the same clients, let's say, right? So I get it, and it's competitive. And people, a lot of the time, are like, yeah, but we need to be on social media. We need to be out there, which is great because people accept that.
Yeah.
That for them to transform, they need to have a plan and they need to execute on that plan, right? But it's actually having a proper social media plan in the first place. It shouldn't be, on a Monday, I do a couple of posts this week. What do I? And a lot of it's afterthought. I find. Whereas what it should be, either you do a monthly plan at the start of the month with all your ideas there, and your ideas you can even generate from ChatGPT. Again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel in that sense. ChatGPT is very good at giving you the ideas and concepts and bullet points, right?
Yeah.
Rather than copying someone else's. But I think that's where I think sometimes agents go wrong. They don't have a schedule. It doesn't have to be monthly. It could be a weekly schedule.
Yeah.
And the posts have to be a mix, a project launch. But a project launch is great, but if 100 agents are doing the same project launch on the same week, how do you stand out, right?
Yep.
So when there is a project launch and you are doing a video, for example, rather than stating the obvious, why don't you do a video about the project, but turn it around where rather than saying, oh, there's a new project launch, it's coming here and X, Y, and Z, it should be, there's a new project launch, and these are the 5 reasons why this project is your next purchase. Something a little bit different, because then that's a value-driven post, right?
It's interesting you say that, because you've seen a little bit of my content,
of course.
I'm guessing, and I don't plan any of it. My only rule is that I need to have at least one piece of content go out every single day, right? And sometimes it's really bad. Sometimes it's to be honest, the content's not that inspiring, or maybe it's not viral, and most of the posts are not viral, right? But I think there's something about having a degree of consistency, producing that much quantity, because then over a long period of time, the quality of for instance, the way you put up your hand like this saying 5, why did you do that? Because everyone who's created a hook before knows that you need to be visual. People are need you to be in your face. It's no longer like a 0.5x situation. Here's 5 reasons why you need to do X and Y, right? And I think with time, you kind of pick these things up and it gets easier. But most people are too lazy to even, put up something meaningful. If you put a simple, picture of a house and say just sold, and that's your whole post for the month, it's just not going to work, right? And nobody cares about that. Maybe it worked 5 years ago, but today is not.
I think with the competitiveness, and I think the post should be a mix of different things. Sold post, whether you've got a new listing, put some of your personal stuff, humanize your account, give some value. I mean, see, the reality of it is I personally have stepped back as I'm not as active as I once was. But then, I've got a company as well, which I'm running, and I have a separate strategy for getting that company out there. So now it's not just about me getting my name out there. Of course, I'm doing that. But luckily, because I have built my account over the years, I don't have to be as much out there, because luckily for me, every time I do post something, the feedback's pretty good. I'm focusing more on actually getting the company brand out there. So then it's synonymous with the two, basically.
Right. It's really interesting. And obviously you've had several highlights, your social media is great, obviously, but more than that, the deals you've done are amazing, right? Tell me about sort of one of those highlight deals, right? And look, I don't know how much excitement it really brings you, whether it's 20 million, 30 million, 100 million, whatever it is. And it doesn't need to be about the amount, but tell me about the most exciting sort of deal that you worked on.
See, I mean, one thing I will say with a lot of the deals that I do, especially on the Palm, they are long-winded, they are stressful, they are, the energy it takes from you mentally, it's so draining, and people don't realize this, especially, and the bigger the ticket, the higher the price, there's just so much more involved with it. And I think sometimes people underestimate that. They'll see the numbers, you've sold a property for 11 million or 20 million or 30 million, so that's great, but they don't know a lot of the time what the backstory is behind it. And what I've recently done, which I think has started working for me more, because obviously the space is much more confined. There's a lot of agents, a lot of brokers, a lot of agencies, there's just a lot of everything going on, right? And even about a year ago, I realized that this is becoming a really crowded space. As much as I've got the experience, see, experience, knowledge is great, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are just going to use it just purely based on that, right?
Right.
So I then kind of had to think of other ideas of how am I going to continue, be consistent with getting deals done. Of course, leverage the fact that I've been here a very long time. I'm a property owner myself.
Yep.
I've done a lot of transactions. I have USP. I've got a value proposition when I meet clients, right? But what I've now done that is I use that value proposition to get clients signed exclusively with me. So what I mean by that is when it comes to sellers, selling, getting sellers signed exclusive is challenging.
Of course.
But I've been pretty good at it. Over the years, I've never struggled that much when it comes to getting sellers exclusive. And it's something that's kind of acceptable as well. You're a seller, you want to sell it, you want my services, you want me to spend X, Y, and Z, and you want me, one person to control the transaction, then you give it to me, right? What people haven't done, and one thing that hasn't really been touched upon, especially in this market, is getting buyers signed exclusive. So rather than telling you about one particular deal that I've transacted, and what's been interesting this year is all my deals I've done. 5 of them, I've represented the buyer, and I've been representing them exclusive every single time.
Wow.
And
so
it's really made a game changing for me. Because the thing is, you're in total control of that transaction. And, so the idea is they sign exclusivity with, and then they only work with me. They could see a property online, but they send me the link. So they have one point of contact. And the reality of it is, when there's a lot of agents in Dubai, some with a lot more experience, some with a lot less, right? And you're a buyer, you're from overseas, you don't really know the Dubai market that well. And when you're talking to multiple agents, everyone has a certain bias. It's natural. Everyone's got a bias, right? And they will give you an opinion based on their experience. But if your experience is 6 months in the market or 12 months in the market, right? What you're going to be telling them is going to be very biased to the sense because of your lack of experience. So with me, I try and always give my client a very grounded response from the experiences I've personally had. And by doing that, I think I give them a much more wider scope of understanding. But then there's some other agents maybe won't be doing that. But if a client is speaking to 5 agents, they get totally confused about who they should be listening to or who's actually, which of these agents are actually representing them, or are they trying to push them into an off-plan project because the developer said they'll pay him 10%, as an example, right? Which happens a lot, by the way, right? So me switching that up has meant I've done 5 very good transactions this year. All of them, the buyers initially were like, well, we've never kind of heard of this exclusive buyer's contract. But as soon as I tell them the benefit, what the value proposition is, not all of them, but they're like, okay, we'll give it a go. And everyone this year that I've signed, I've closed with.
Wow.
So for me, that's the big takeaway. So, and it's been great, and it's good ticket properties as well.
Basically, just having a consistent. So what you're saying is, it's better to have a consistent set of deal flow rather than just have that one-off deal that is so exciting.
See, for years, the way I worked, it was a pure numbers game, working with lots of clients, and hopefully it would work. And when there wasn't so many agents in the market, I stood out anywhere, or I stood out for the Palm, for example, right? So, I won't say it was easier, but when there's 5,000 agents and there's only a handful that know the Palm inside out, then it was, I had a lot of leverage, and a lot of clients would come to me, or agents would come to me, and so forth. But when you've got 25,000 registered brokers and probably around 70, 80,000 when you include unregistered brokers.
80,000?
I would think so. I would think. I mean, there's agencies with 700, 800 agents.
Oh, wow.
And I can tell you probably 20% of them probably have RERAs, if that. So what does that tell you, right? And there's a lot of agencies like that. So I think there's a lot of freelancers, or whatever you want to call them, right? So that space has become so clustered with so many people, right? So it's much more difficult to stand out now. And that's why for me, and in the last 3-4 years, I think post-COVID, huge influx, because the market's just gone absolutely... It's unreal. I never thought I would experience this market, but it has. It's gone up and up and up and up. It's great. There's a lot of transactions going on. There's a lot of launches, and the market's very healthy, let's say, right? With that comes a huge number of people who want to get into the industry, because so and so they know has done this transaction, this deal, and this. on paper, there's a lot of money to be made in this industry, but it's definitely not easy. I can tell you that. You're always going to get people who get lucky, and you always have these guys who be in the industry 3 months, they end up selling a floor or whatever they've done, right? They make millions, and everyone thinks, oh, well, he did it and she did it. Yeah, they've done it, but that might be the 0.5%, probably less than that, right? Yeah. The guys, it's a 80-20 rule everywhere. Like even in companies, 20% are making 80% of the income, but in the market, that's the same. Yeah, you're 20% of the guys that are probably making 80% of that income. So to stay in that 20%, for me, I had to come up with more ideas. And this is a new thing I've adapted. So those deals have been very special for me because, that concept that I came up with, which I was like, is it going to, because there's so many clients I'm not working with. Yeah. Because once I'm with an exclusive buyer, I'm with them every single day. I'm talking, there's a lot of time and energy and effort given to them, right? Yeah. Now, if I was to do that, but not close any deals, and then not work like I used to work, which is work with lots of people and hopefully get a deal, then it would be like back to square one again, right? Yeah. So luckily it has worked out, and I think it's been great.
And obviously, like when you're doing well for yourself, right? You don't really think about this, but when times are hard, and like, look, honestly, selling a technology company that initially had very limited technology and now has a full suite, I know that it was such a grind, right? Like I'm cold messaging guys like yourself. Nobody really wants to see another tech guy, to be honest. Like it's just the most irritating. Oh, here comes the guy who is going to be cash outflow for me. Let's go, right? Like it's very annoying. So sales in general is such an art and such a tough thing to do. Have you ever been through a rough patch, right, in the sales kind of grind, and how did you deal with that?
Honestly, every few years I go through a bit of a rut, and I think this is normal, and I think a lot of the time it's burnout. See, this industry, it's 7 days a week, it doesn't stop, it's 24/7, right? And you do get burnout, and then you just need to have some time out. And I think every time I've had a burnout, and sometimes it's not the burnout, it could be the market. Logistics have changed. It could be. But I know myself, I've had burnouts every so many years. I've been doing this for 15 years now. People get burnout after doing it for 6 months. And that's the reality, because it's such a tough industry, right? So I've had cycles and 6 months where I question myself. It's happened a lot. When I started this agency, and when the cost totally spiraled out of control, which I thought I knew the numbers, but I clearly didn't. What do? You end up questioning yourself, right? Yeah. And the questioning myself, should I be going with a boutique agency? Because if I had a larger agency, I've had much more agents, it's going to be more income coming in, but then there's a big churn. Or do I stick with my concept? So I have ended up sticking with the original concept I came up with. But yeah, the first 6 months of this year were really, really tough. That was more because I think the whole stress of starting the company and understanding there was much more to it. I mean, being a sales director and managing partner and all that is great, but then you have your own company, you realize there's much more to it than meets the eye. But I mean, a lot of the time what I'll do is that sometimes to move forward, you got to take a step back. So when you hit that ceiling, you got to take a step back. I read a lot, I try and be quite conscious with what I do. And I think somebody's going back to basics, going back to the foundation, seeing where things haven't worked. Every deal I've done since I've ever been here, I've got it on my own record. I sometimes have to go back and see where the clients have come from, where were the leads, so just to understand. And it's trying to understand what works or what has worked, and maybe is that going to work? I guess some of the things that were working 10 years ago don't work now anyway, right? But a lot of it is going a little bit backwards, and just trying to take a bit of time out, try and understand, okay, what direction you want to go. Maybe we need to re-strategize, we need to pivot, maybe change. Even since I've started the company, I've had to pivot multiple different times with certain things I thought would work out, and it hasn't worked out. Right. And even like just taking time out. I mean, I'd say the last 2 summers, I've taken out 6 weeks full. Where I've not even been in Dubai. I did that this summer, and I did that last summer as well. And I think it's good because it gives me time to, when I'm away, you generate new ideas. You're away from the kind of 24/7 hardcore hustle kind of grind here. So sometimes you do need to take a step back. And also, I'd say I've learned to balance life much better. I think I was all 24/7 and hustle and grind. Hustle and grinding is great, but it's not good for your health. That's the reality of it, right? Hustle, yes, but grinding non-stop, I think longevity-wise, it's not great. And I think I've seen it myself, people in the industry who do get burnt out and they have a lot of health issues. I've not had any major health issues, thanks God. But I realized a few years ago I had to start balancing my life, how many hours I work. And when I got married, I think once I got married, I really... kids, actually, once I had kids, I would say was probably the pinnacle, the turning point of having balance, how many hours of work I'm doing, how much time I spend with my kids. Robin Sharma 5 a.m. Club was a game changer for me when I read that book years ago. I did the 5 a.m. Club for about 2.5 years consistently. Now I do the 6 a.m. Club. Not because the 5 a.m. Club doesn't work, because with anything, these concepts, you take the best. So when you do it for someone, you realize, okay, this works, that works. So now it's 6 a.m. Club, but I've taken out the best parts and I still follow the rituals and so on. It works.
And it's consistency, right? It's not 100%. The arbitrary time that you need to wake up at, right?
Exactly.
Like, you can wake up at 3 a.m.
Exactly. And I think you're right. I think being consistent, resilient as well, just not giving up, and having that kind of that plan in place. So for me, being able to do that, taking a step back, having a balance. I very rarely work weekends, for example. And people are like, well, you got to work weekends. Well, no, I don't work weekends. People always say to me they can't get in touch with me after 7 o'clock. Yeah, because my phone's on silent. Unless I'm expecting a call. Because 99% of the time, it's an agent who's messaging me. That's the reality of the situation. And 99% of the time, it can wait till the next day. It's never that urgent.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, like nothing related to money almost is ever that urgent, right?
It really isn't.
Except when you're starting out, maybe like, and you need to make ends meet.
I get it. I mean, there's a period where you have to be all the time, but a lot of the time you can take a step back. People are just scared because they're used to thinking. And I think people just think, well, I'm self-employed. I've got to be just working all the time, and I've got to justify to myself that I am self-employed, so I'm just going to work constantly non-stop, which is great when you're younger, don't get me wrong. When I was much younger, I was working much more, but it's not sustainable. And you know, if you want to stay consistent and you want longevity in the industry, which is what most people should want, because it should be a career, it shouldn't be a little stint that you do for a couple of years and make money and get out, right? If you want to do it properly, then I think the balance needs to be key from day one, I think.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So we spoke a little bit about the sales part. You mentioned books, right? What are you reading right now, and what's kind of like inspiring you about it?
So I read a lot. I've read a lot of Robin Sharma books.
Okay.
So I'm actually
reading, bias here for Robin Sharma.
No, I'm not. See, interestingly, there's a lot of these motivational speakers, and I've read a lot of these guys. I don't want to name their names. It doesn't really do it for me. To be very honest with you, this kind of banging the chest and all that, it's not my thing. But it's different for different people, right? Because we're all different. We're all different humans. We're all wired differently, right? So what works for me might not work for you, and vice versa. Some people might read Robin Sharma and fall asleep. They might find it quite boring, right? So for me, it's a mixture of reading his books. I have an app called Mind Valley. Mind Valley is Vision, right? I think he's coming here next month. He's on one of the things, right? So Mind Valley has also been a game changer for me as well. So that's an app that I have. So I wasn't into listening to podcasts, right? I always thought, well, I need to be traditional, I need to read books, and because it goes into my brain better, or whatever, right? Which it does. But I actually realized podcasts are also quite good as well. So I listen to a lot of So in the morning I listen to podcasts, for example. In the evening is probably more of a book. But I've become more podcast heavier than reading books, and that's because it's more practical, right? Because podcasts, you can just kind of listen.
What do you hate about podcasts right now?
No. I love podcasts. I mean,
no, I know, but like, what's the one thing that gives you the ick? Oh, come on! Like again, like what's that one thing when you listen to a podcast, you're like?
It depends. I think so there's a podcast I'm listening to now, for example, right? And it's about supplementation, biohacking, for example, right? Great podcast.
You're a big longevity guy, right? Like,
I'm into all that kind of stuff as well. I took my son to the muscle show the other day, just to. Not that I'm saying those guys are a bit different, but it's just interesting to go to the muscle show. But I think one thing that it's not that I don't like it. I just sometimes find it a little bit like I find it's more of an American thing where when some of these speakers are talking, they kind of come across like they're slightly exaggerated. It's slightly over the top, let's say, right? So one of the podcasts I'm listening to now, great podcast, 80% of it's great, but 20%, I just find it a bit too over the top, where he kind of, I don't know maybe that's just to pique the interest of people, but I think there's maybe a slight exaggeration in some of his stories, let's say. I think
with messaging, it's always kind of like, even if you look at politics, right?
It's like just, the way I see it, it's like I can kind of see through it.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, really, you need to mention that? But I get it. He's not making a podcast for me. He's making it for a wider audience, a global audience, right? Yeah. And maybe that resonates with most of the people, right? Yeah. But that's one thing. But in general, with podcasts, I'm only listening to podcasts within topics I have interest in. Yep. So I listened to a lot of podcasts with Robin Sharma as well. Yep. But then I just found it much easier because with Mind Valley, they've got lots of different subjects. For example, yep. you go into it like biohacking or health or business, relation, whatever it might be.
Wishing you're going to pay me for this one, man. This is a crazy endorsement.
But it's amazing. you literally go in, right? Yeah. And then they've got tons of, and then I normally would watch the intro to see if it interests me, the speaker. Yeah. And then I would listen, and then you got these guided meditations and stuff you can do at night. It's very cool for what you pay. Like people are like, yeah, but I don't know how many dollars it is a year, but like those kind of things I think are absolutely priceless. When people ask me, I remember when I was a sales director for a previous company, I have a list of books that I said to agents, you need to read these books for your benefit, not for my benefit, it's for your benefit, right? And every time I do this, so it's normally when I'm doing the trainings with agents, someone will always ask, how much is the book? And it baffles me. But I get it, because I was like that 10 years ago, right? Sure. Because it's a mindset of, I don't know what the word is, but it's like those books cost 60, 70, 80 dirhams, right? And my point is, the question shouldn't be how much is the book. The question should be, where can I get this book from? Because that 70, 80 dirham book, the amount of knowledge I'm going to absorb from it, right? And hopefully execute on it. It's not just about reading the book, right? It's executing on it, right? Is going to change your life. So that really shouldn't be the question. So, but it shows you that everyone's journey, they're on a different path to growth, right? Yeah. So when you're early stage of growth and you've got a growth mindset, you're trying to build, you're trying to change your habits, your behaviors, your belief systems, right? Yeah. You want to start reading books, but that question pops up. And I was like that 10 years ago. Oh, that book's £20. I'm not buying that. Right. But now that question doesn't even come. Because let's be honest, most people can afford these. But I'm sorry, but most people can afford 50, 60, 70, 80 different books, right?
Because the same people that probably asked you the price of that book will spend 10 grand at £5 like on the weekends, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It's like, oh, it's so expensive. Yes. But on the weekends, I'm investing in myself at £5.
Exactly. And it's just little things like that. But yeah, it's just interesting when you see people, because like I said, everyone's growth comes in different. Some people don't have a growth mindset at all, and they're happy with how they are, which is great. Listen, everyone's each their own. But for me, in any industry, whatever you do, especially real estate, for example, you have to have a growth mindset in the sense you are questioning your beliefs, you're upgrading constantly, you're innovating, and you can only upgrade and innovate your belief system if you question it, right? And then you need to adapt the new technologies like the AIs, right? So whatever behaviors that or your habits that you currently have, you constantly got to be updating them. Otherwise, you get stuck, right? And that's with anything, especially with the way technology is taking off, right? And also what I find interesting is when people accept we need a growth mindset, we want to change, we want to read books, we want to read autobiography, we want to go to all these, shows and seminars, let's say, right, of motivational speakers or whatever, right?
Not to name names.
Not to name names. And there's nothing wrong with them. And I go to them myself as well. I'm going to the Gladiator Summit in a couple of weeks' time, for example, right? Yeah. But all of that is great. But the key thing, which also I find very frustrating, that there's no execution on it. So what was the point? You go there, you absorb all that because as humans, you absorb all the information, right? Within 24 to 40, most of that information's gone. So unless you're writing, so I write a lot. I have a remarkable, which is great invention, I think, because because you can't get distracted on a remarkable, right? It's not like an iPad where you're going to have notifications. I don't know what that is, by the way. What is remarkable? Okay, so remarkable is basically like an iPad. Okay. So it's like writing on a piece of paper. It feels very natural, but you can write as much as you want. You can save loads of folders and this and that and that. I mean, you could technically do it on an iPad, right? But on iPad, you've got internet and there's constantly notifications and the things go. This is only purely for writing, right? So I write a lot and then I constantly go back on my notes as well. Yeah. Because even when you absorb stuff and you read it and you try and make sure you implement it, after 3 to 6 to 9 months, there's more information you're taking in, you forget things. Yeah. I think it's just natural. Everyone does that, right? So I think it's really important if you are going out there to improve yourself, to have a system where you try and execute on whatever information you're actually absorbing. Otherwise, it's kind of a little bit... And I know people, by the way, who go to every single seminar and read every book, and I'm like overwhelmed. Like, how when do you even get time to do all this? But then nothing changes, and then they question themselves. And because that transformation doesn't happen,
right?
Because the execution doesn't happen, and it's trying to bind them together.
Interesting you talk about these summits, right? I find it very funny, and I find myself at very, very few of them. But what I see people do is take a picture, let's say, okay, let's name an event in this case, Ryan Serhant, right?
Yeah.
Everyone went to that.
Yeah.
And I saw so many people getting a photo with this guy, right? And he probably has no freaking clue who they are.
Of course.
Right? Just another agent, like 5,000 people in the room. I don't know how many people went, but
5,000. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is, like, you take this picture with someone, you post it online to make everyone think that they're your best friend or whatever, but everyone can read through the bullshit. Like, especially like anyone who's switched on enough to be able to afford a $1 million home.
Of course.
Let's say, like, they know that you're not besties with Ryan Serhant, who's a star of a Netflix show or whatever it is. Chances are, if you were actually friends with him, you probably wouldn't have to post it on Instagram.
Exactly.
Right?
You wouldn't need the validation, right?
Exactly.
And that's basically what it is half the time.
Vanity.
I think, that vanity element, that validation element for every... And I was the same, I would say. Years ago, I'd post a lot more. I've been here and I've done that and I've seen this person and I would hang out with him. Yeah. And I think the older I've got, I don't need anyone's acceptance or validation. So, well done. Yeah. You did that. I mean, I was on, in the summer, I was away for 6 weeks. No one would even know I was away for 6 weeks because I didn't really see the need to post or, constantly post. So I did this and I went here. Whereas years ago, it was
4 seasons. Zuma.
I was much more posting about where I was and what I did. And I think that also comes with age as well. But you're right. I think a lot of the agents went there, probably spent 6-7 hours there. Great summit. You've got Ryan Serhant, one of the top agents in the world. Firas, one of the, I'd say, he's one of the movers and shakers in Dubai when it comes to real estate. Yeah. I have a lot of time for Firas. And I think when you got these two powerhouses giving you all that information, but at the end of it, if the only thing you've got is a picture on your Instagram, but nothing, so, if I was to speak to this person and say, oh, by the way, can you summarize how the event was? But you can barely get a couple of sentences together.
I don't think
just tells you now that they're there for the wrong reasons.
I didn't think I saw a single person that posted a summary of the
event. Yeah, exactly, because because it summarized, went to this great event, and these were the key highlights and key takeaways. It was more just look at me, I had a picture with Ryan Serhant.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
It's interesting, since we're talking about him, I think it's worth mentioning, I hate being a fan, to be very honest with you. Like, I've been in the tech industry for a bit where every big tech CEO thinks that they're the shit, right? Yeah. So your Mark Zuckerbergs to all these people, and like, it's the same scenario. They'll come to a room, they'll give a talk, and everyone takes a picture with them. Like, oh my God, Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, or Mark Zuckerberg, Meta, and they just trying to posture, vanity, like this kind of thing. And I hate it, right? I absolutely hate it. Yeah. I believe more firmly in building one-to-one relationships with these individuals, right? Even if it's a longer funnel,
of course,
right? Even if it takes like 3 years, I would much rather spend that time investing in that relationship over taking a quick photo and then being like, Ryan Serhant. Like, so he had this interesting story. You probably, I don't know if you've seen this video, but he talks about a client that was signing with him to buy a house, and he was just getting started in New York real estate, and like somebody had a certain amount of several $1 million to invest. Apparently he was asking for a proof of funds or something like that. The guy didn't reply for like forever, kept following up basically. Eventually the dude like sends across a proof of funds, but then there's still a contract bid that needs to be signed, and apparently this guy's in Paris. So Ryan's like, oh, you know what, I'm actually in Paris for the weekend or something like that, would love to catch up. And he wasn't actually in Paris, right? So he takes a flight over to Paris as soon as he hears this guy reply saying, okay, let's meet at 10 p.m. Sitting there, and basically nobody turns up until about 1 a.m. He's still sitting there. The guy turns up with like, a fleet of bodyguards or whatever it is. And then, the next thing you know, you have a contract that like a piece of paper that's finally signed, right? And then you have to actually transfer the money and things like that. And that takes another, so he goes back, by the way, he's very broke at this point, or at least that's how it's described in the videos.
Yeah.
Goes back to New York and is like waiting for the money to land. And I think this process went on for a few years.
A few years? Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a long follow-up process that he speaks about. And it's interesting because towards the end, obviously, he came to New York and like I think he had like a armada of like people and like black Escalades and like, the whole vibe basically, right? He's a big shot. He wasn't a suspicious guy. And he kind of asked him like, why did you, and it like ended up doing about $300 million worth of deals with him, right? Like because of one reason, and that was just the follow up, right? You kept on top of the things, and like you kind of informed the individual about things in the market, or you just kind of made them laugh. To be honest, so I saw all of this, and I was like, and I only got sent this after I'd done all this. I saw Ryan's coming to Dubai. I was like, let me invite him to the podcast.
Yeah,
it's my natural thing to anyone cool that I meet, like I'm just like let's have them on the pod, right? Especially in the brokerage owner kind of space. I sent an email to Ryan, like, hi Ryan, I heard you're coming to Dubai. I think the subject line was, what do Ryan Serhan, Daniel Daggers, and Gary Hersham have in common? And the point was to say me, right? But then he had to open the email to basically read that. No response to the first email. The second email, I was just like, oh, Ryan, just following up, whatever. Like, very standard, boring, vanilla, nothing. Third email was like, you know what? This guy's not going to reply to me. There's like 5,000 people there and he's here. Like somebody's paid him probably, I don't know, a couple $1 million to be here
of course.
Or something like that, right? And like he probably doesn't have time, right? So I sent him an email with all these shawarma recommendations. It's like, oh, Hessa Street Bar, Al Beiruti Sheikh Zayed Road, right? And like it's a bunch of these. And once those, once the shawarma recommendations done, got nothing back. And I told my team, guys, I kind of sent them shawarma. They're like, you're crazy, right? Sent a couple more emails and I noticed that he had gone to meet a few of my friends in industry per se.
Yeah, I saw, because he was there, but he went to some properties and he did a few different things.
So he met a few people that we know, we both would know. And like, I was like, great, you met them, awesome. I don't like to ask for favors, which is why I didn't ask any of them to introduce me to you or anything like that. And that was it, right? Like I was like, you know what? It's done. He's gone. The guy's like in Germany.
He was only here for 2 days, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's gone to Germany or something like that. And then I get an email, right? And it's very simple. It's like, thank you, Joel, for sending me like basically all this kind of stuff. And he waited 5 emails to basically say that.
Before he responded back.
Yeah. And the funny thing is he didn't have to. Right?
Of course.
So for him, I think it's a $300 million game, right? Which is like, let's see how much you have, because there's a lot of volume being sent my way. Why the hell should I listen to you? You're just another tech bro, right? Yeah. And like the same would go for an agent that would
100%.
Yeah, right? Everyone wants in on the room. And I think that the power of the follow-up is just
and the resilience to continue and being consistent and
I'm sure you've seen a ton of that in your like have you had a similar story where someone's
I've always been a firm believer of using CRM. So I've always, even when I interestingly, I always use my own CRM.
Yeah.
So all the companies I used to work with, I found their CRMs a little bit boring and they weren't really doing very, very much. So for years, up to the point where I started my own agency, I've had my own CRM that I paid for and I was using and so forth. And the amount of clients that have said to me that, you know what, yes, we've got to give it to you. Like, you're really good at following up. And there's one client, for example, I think it was nearly 2.5 years of follow-up.
Wow.
Before he ended up buying a villa on the Palm from me.
Wow.
And he was getting all my market reports, because I do touch points as well, right? As soon as I've got them, I've saved their contact, got their email address, and so I've got their kind of main details. They have touch points. So minimum, either once a month or once a quarter, they will get something from me.
Yep.
And a lot of the time, it's a value-driven content. So it's market reports, it's this, it's that. And I've been doing that for years. I think now it's much easier. A lot of people are doing market reports. And so that's something I was doing 10 years ago when no one was doing it, to be honest.
Right.
And I spent hours creating these market reports, and I have them on my website, right? And then I'd link it to my website.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've got so many clients that have said to me that the reason we've stuck with you is because, unlike the other agents, we've spoken to them, maybe a couple of calls, couple of messages, and then nothing after that. And I try to instill that to my agents as well, that don't underestimate the power of follow-up, because, you know, I could meet a client, you get on with them, they might just not be ready then, either to buy or to sell, but they could be ready in 6 months, it could be ready in, I don't know, a year, they could be ready in 2 or 3 years. Like this villa client took over 2 years, but he ended up buying, right? I know, interestingly, you know, where you were saying interesting stories. There's 2 villas I sold on the Palm, where my clients never even viewed the villas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It just came to my head then, because you were saying stories behind.
It's secondary, right? Like,
yeah, you know, it's a secondary, ready villas.
Of course.
So one of the villas was years ago in 2010. A client, it's interesting because I had a viewing with him, and in those days I would wait even for an hour for a viewing. Nowadays I don't have the patience. If clients don't have the respectability of telling me 20 minutes and then I'm out, because I've got things to do, right? So I waited, remember, an hour for this client, and it was a tenanted property. There's a tenant in there, and then tenant's like, listen, I'm sorry, but I'm not letting you in if you come now, right? So anyway, I said to the client, I'm leaving. I leave. Client turns up like another half an hour after to the villa. Yes, I'm here. I'm really sorry. Something happened. Okay, great. I'm not at the villa, number one. Number two, you can't go inside the villa because the tenant's not going to allow you. He's really annoyed. So if you want, you can just look at it from the outside. And I thought, who's going to buy a villa from the outside? He offered, and he ended up buying the villa.
Wow.
And it was quite a lot in those days. And then a few years later, and this was a really interesting story, in fact, I had a Saudi client, right? So I had a seller, and he had a villa, signature villa, huge villa, right? And interestingly, he was very private about the fact he was selling the villa. So he sent me some pictures over, and I was like, you know, it'd be good if I can actually go and see the villa. I've not seen the villa. I've just driven past it, right? Unless you have a client, you know, he was one of those kind of difficult type of clients. Bloody hell. You want me to sell your villa, but you don't want me to see it, and you sent me some really awful pictures, like taken from a Nokia, right? But I'll see what I can do. But this was like 7-8 years ago, right? I then sent it to a couple of friends of mine, agent friends of mine, and one of my other agent friends, listen, I've got a client, he's interested in it, but we need some better pictures. He'll buy without seeing it. And I'm like, yeah, one of them, is it? Because you always get that. Yeah, the client will buy. He doesn't need to see the villa. Really doesn't need to see it. And at the time, it was 32 million, the villa, right?
Wow.
So it was still a lot of money. Cut long story short, I ended up going and, because he didn't want professional pictures, because he was scared that you'd start advertising the villa. And he didn't want anyone to know. I said, listen, I'll go and just take pictures with my phone.
Yeah.
He said, okay, fine. And he's not based here, the client. He's based in Saudi.
Yeah.
Sent someone. I took pictures with the phone. I then sent it to this agent, who then sent it to her client, who, surprise, was also from Saudi.
Oh, shoot.
Ended up buying the villa for 32 million. When we signed the contract, we realized that they were cousins, the two.
No way.
They're related.
That's insane.
Yeah. But the good thing I will say is, because sometimes in these scenarios, what can happen is clients can disappear.
Yeah.
Because they think, let's just do the deal. Because there was fees being paid from both sides. They did the deal, fees were paid, 2%, it's big fees, right? On something like that. Did the transaction, and they were actually related. They were cousins. They were related to each other.
Wow,
yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah.
Well,
they never. The buyer never saw the villa. He bought it from pictures I took from my phone.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, look, I feel like we're just hitting our stride, and then like I've been given the given the time warning. Yeah. But I want to ask you one final question before I let you go, and that's, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
What advice would I give my 21-year-old self? I mean, one thing I will say is I've lived my life on my own rules. I really have. Despite the fact that people are, I've not had a lot of agreement with, decisions I've made. But one thing I think I would say is I would definitely have had a mentor from an earlier age. I think I did a lot of guesswork, a lot of trial and error. I never had a mentor. Nothing against my family or my parents or anything, but we don't come from a business entrepreneur-minded mindset, let's say, right? So I had to figure a lot of things out by myself, and I was a little bit late when it came to reading, acquiring knowledge. podcasts and seminars, and just trying to, understand the power of having a mentor, one-to-ones, because you can fast track so much quicker. And that's, I do mentoring now with agents, right? Yeah. One-to-one, because the reality of it is, in any industry, whatever you do, there's a way of doing it. There's a Japanese concept called growth by painful experiences. It's called Kensho and Satori moments. So Kensho moments are you grow by painful experiences, which is a lot of what I've done for years. A lot of my experiences, I had a lot of ups and downs, but a lot of my growth came from these Kensho moments, right? But really what you want to do is concentrate on the Satori moments. And the Satori moments is pivoting and transforming. And that transformation normally comes from execution, from doing mentoring, for example, right? Wow. And reading more and doing more. And I've been a little bit late in that. Say I've been doing that in the last 5 or 6 years. But if I had started that much earlier rather than trying to figure it all out by myself, I think I could have even been more elevated than I currently am. Again, listen, I have no regrets, but that's the one thing I think, having that mentor and growing through, having mentors, having one-to-ones, and going through execution and transformation rather than having all these painful experiences and then growing through that. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think, for me, failure, and I've failed in a lot of things, by the way, failure is a prerequisite to growth and success. And you got to go through it. And I think, and everyone needs to understand that no one, it's not, the growth isn't like that. It's going to be up and down, up and down. You just got to be prepared for it, right? The rainy days, and you just got to get up and continue going, that resilience. And that's where the mindset kicks in. Yeah. And you're healthy. You've got a healthy body and mind. Like if I wasn't healthy, let's say physically, I couldn't do half the things that I can do now. Absolutely. Because, running around and doing this, and I think that's helped as well. Yeah. But yeah, that's been sustainable in terms of, I've been very consistent with that. But that 21-year-old thing you've said, but that would be my key takeaway, actually having a mentor from a younger age.
Well, Yasin, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
This has been yet another episode of The Real Ones, and thank you so much for joining me. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.